First, everyone is very excited with the potential launch of the New York City PACE program, joining very successful programs throughout the nation. Our first speaker is Fred Lee, who's the co-CEO of NYC. NYC is the first local green bank in the United States, and it provides loans for building energy efficiency and clean energy projects. And they will be the program administrator for the New York City soon to be launched C-PACE program. Fred helped launch NYC, previously serving as general counsel and vice president. Prior to NYC, Fred led the Center for Economic Transformation's Clean Tech and Energy team at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and prior to that was a structured finance attorney. Fred holds an MBA with a concentration in real estate finance from Columbia Business School, a JD from Cornell Law School, and a BA in political science from Amherst College. Our second speaker will be Elizabeth Kelly, who's a senior policy advisor at the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability. New York City is committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 and lowering greenhouse gas emissions across our region. Elizabeth works with community organizations, real estate stakeholders, utility partners, designers, and residents to drive policy and programs to reduce carbon emissions in New York buildings. Her team is currently focused on launching the New York Accelerator and PACE financing to bring much needed resources to the private market to advance building decarbonization. And I believe Elizabeth will be the first speaker, if you want to launch her slides.
Thanks so much, Michelle. It's great to be here with all of you and with Fred Lee from NYC to talk a little bit more about PACE, C-PACE, property assessed clean energy financing in New York. I've been asked to share a couple of slides to start things off, just to talk about the landscape in New York in terms of current local laws. Next slide. So the goal here for New York, and I think many other municipalities around the country and the world are following in this on this path of carbon neutrality by 2050. Next slide. And in New York City, to reach carbon neutrality by that date, we need to radically reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we use both to heat and cool our buildings, provide domestic hot water, and to power electricity and provide energy to our grid. And so that is kind of demonstrated in this graph you see, where the majority of emissions currently in New York City are coming from buildings. And so to decarbonize the city, we need to cut fossil fuel use from the building sector, and to put us on a pathway to carbon neutrality by 2050. In order to do that, the city has already passed several local laws that really enable this work to happen, both from a mandates and penalty perspective, as well as from a resource and opportunities to enable this work to happen. So this is a suite of measures that was passed in April 2019 that's commonly referred to as the Climate Mobilization Act, or CMA, which we might throw acronyms around throughout the rest of the hour. So this is what we mean when we talk about CMA, or the Climate Mobilization Act. It's a package of measures really aimed at reducing energy and carbon from our buildings. We have Local Law 92 and 94, which requires buildings that are getting a new roof to install solar or green roofs. Local Law 95 is putting a building energy efficiency grade in the lobby of buildings over 25,000 square feet to provide transparency to residents and passerbyers and other tenants about what the efficiency level is of that property. Local Law 96 is what we're talking about today. PACE financing. Fred's going to give you a great overview of what that means and what that looks like in New York. And then Local Law 97, which is definitely gets a lot of face time in in our industry is the commitment to achieve certain reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And I'm going to be talking about Local Law 97 a bit more today. So overarchingly, the suite of bills, the Climate Mobilization Act, is very ambitious and extremely needed in order to meet carbon neutrality. And that as a result of this work, we're also, and a result of like doing this work, passing this legislation, we'll see the carbon reductions, but we'll also see an influx of jobs created and a decrease in both preventable deaths and hospitalizations avoided every year because of the improvement in air quality and health and safety of our buildings. So Local Law 97 is all about carbon. It is a law that requires buildings over 25,000 square feet to meet greenhouse gas emission limits starting in 2024. And then those limits, or sometimes we call them budgets, they increase over the next couple of decades, getting more and more stringent as we propel towards 2050. Each type of property has a greenhouse gas budget that's based off of the occupancy classification of the spaces within the property. So the budget for a square footage of multifamily residential is going to be very different from the budget of a supermarket, like a square foot of a supermarket or a hospital or a laboratory or research center. You will definitely need an engineer or an architect to help you calculate what your penalty is, and then set a course of action towards reducing your carbon emissions in order to comply with the budgets that are set by Local Law 97. And if you failure to comply or non-compliance will result in penalties of $268 per ton of emissions in excess of that annual budget or annual carbon cap. I have a couple of tools that I'll highlight later in the slides that will show you how you can get a good example of where your building is today. But looking at the city overall, this is a layout of kind of all of New York City buildings that are covered under Local Law 97, broken out by kind of general use types. And if you advance one, you'll see here's the limit for 2024. And what we know from doing research on our end is about 20% of buildings that are covered under Local Law 97 will need to take action to reduce carbon emission in the next 3 years to meet this deadline by 2024. But as we move through the century and we get to 2030, not too far away, that budget gets more stringent, more buildings will need to comply. And by 2025, the majority, about 80% of buildings covered under Local Law 97 will need to enact some type of, and in many cases, some pretty aggressive carbon cutting measures in order to comply with the law. This is a different visualization that kind of looks at this gray cloud is like your building or a building's carbon emissions today. And you see that by doing the green measures, that green block, business as usual, we do think that most buildings that are covered by the law can be under the 2024 penalty cap by doing kind of simple, low-hanging fruit, LED lightings, make sure your systems are clean and well maintenance and insulated. If you're already doing that kind of stuff, you'll probably be in pretty good situation. But then as we get to 2030, it's the action that needs to be taken is really to look towards decarbonizing on-site energy production and the creation of heating and hot water. So that means we're going to be taking out fossil fuel equipment, boilers, and mostly boilers and other HVAC equipment, and replacing that with electrified systems like heat pumps and domestic hot water that is electric, that is powered by electricity, in order to reduce the amount of on-site carbon generated. And the third part of this we have all these new like electrified heating and cooling equipment in our buildings. That needs to be hooked up to a clean grid that's powered by renewable energy. And that's where commitments, maybe many of you are familiar with this, but commitments from the state really come into play with their commitments to a clean grid for New York City, for New York State by 2040. There's a lot of different pieces of policy, both at the city and the state level, plus work that needs to be done in buildings and on the ground in order for New York City and, as us as kind of leaders and a generator of opportunity throughout the region to get to this carbon neutrality goal. It's a lot to take in, but the real takeaway here is just two things. We just have to use less energy, and we need to switch that, the energy that we are using away from fossil fuel and towards cleaner renewable energy like wind and hydro and solar power. So I mentioned this before, there's a really great calculator that's provided by our partner, the Building Energy Exchange. You can scan this QR code or with your phone or go to this website that I have here. The tool allows you to pull in your information, like your building's benchmark information, which should be on file if a building's over 25,000 square feet in New York City. And so it pulls in your energy consumption information and helps you calculate quickly what your penalties might be for Local Law 97. And this is a really good place to start if you're new to this, or if you're working with a client or a customer and you want to show them something quick and that's simplified and already kind of designed and has that user experience, and you can manipulate the inputs as well to adjust this to make it more suitable to whatever situation you find yourself in. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the resources. We're going to talk a lot about the resources that are available to help building owners comply with 97, but also the Climate Mobilization Act and our carbon neutrality goals in general. One is the New York City Accelerator Program. This is a program that is here to help New Yorkers, New York building owners, New York building operators, managers, engineers, contractors, architects, kind of the whole lenders, appraisers, insurers, just the whole market here to really transform the way our buildings are built and operated, and to continue that fight for climate change through carbon reduction in our buildings. There's a ton of resources already available online at NYC.gov/accelerator. We have more information on financing and incentives, Local Law 33, which is the energy grade rating, energy efficiency rating that I mentioned earlier, as well as Local Law 97. One more slide, please. And then the accelerator will also be responsible for helping to do the outreach and technical assistance and getting projects, contract ready for the PACE program that Fred's going to talk all about. But we did want to highlight how kind of all of these pieces of what's happened in New York City are working together. We have the legislation, we have big goals, we have a technical assistance program that's live now. You can go to that website, nyc.gov/accelerator. And find out what you need to know, access trainings, information about incentives. And then we're also bringing this really wonderful financing program to help engage the capital markets, bring more resources to New York City in order to proceed in this aggressive but really exciting work that we have ahead of us. That's my intro landscape of the market. And again, please visit our website to learn more about the program. And I'm going to pass it over to, to learn more about the Accelerator Program. It'll be a great place for PACE, as well as learning about more information about any of the Climate Mobilization Act local laws. But I'll pass it over to Fred to share more about PACE.
Great, thank you. Fred? Well, while we're waiting for Fred's slides. So Elizabeth, most of what you portrayed was eliminating fossil fuels in the individual property and possibly the source of the electricity being renewable. Are there any measures that are cost effective for an individual property owner as far as using renewable generation on site? Or is the city's policy really directed more towards delivering the renewable offsite more of a district?
I think it really depends. I mean, it does depend on location and building typology. If you have a manufacturing facility in an outer borough with, you know, an acre or two of open roof space, seems like a really great opportunity for solar. And I think a lot of people are already pursuing that. We also are looking into the feasibility of geothermal. Again, you know, in Queens and places where there's oil, like oil and natural gas constraints. But I think most buildings won't have the opportunity because of our density to have on-site generation. So it's, you know, it is a really big effort of the state and super critical to be bringing power, you know, clean power right into Zone J in New York City.
Great, thank you. Fred, now we're going to hear from Fred Lee, the co-CEO of NYC.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Elizabeth. So I'm going to be talking to you about the PACE program, but quickly an introduction to my organization, the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, or NYCEC. We're a 501c3 nonprofit green bank, mission-driven. We're created by the state of New York under the Bloomberg administration. And our focus is really providing financing to energy efficiency and clean energy projects in buildings. So New York City is certainly our home market, but we do provide financing across the Northeast and the Atlantic. We've financed projects in Pennsylvania, in Maryland, in DC. So our footprint is broad, but our home base is New York City, as our name would indicate. Our mission, again, is to deliver financing solutions, energy efficiency and clean energy in buildings, advance those markets, and to do it scalably and accessibly. So PACE is certainly one of those scalable solutions that we're really excited about. But we're also very focused on equity and accessibility. We want to make sure that all sectors of the sort of the New York City population beyond can access the financing products that we offer, and certainly that, again, that runs to PACE as well. So just quickly, our impact, some verticals, environmental impact. This is sort of to date what our projects have achieved. 829,000 metric tons of CO2 eliminated on the environmental front. On the social front, 72% of our projects are in LMI communities, so that reflects our commitment to equity. And then on the financial front, we've mobilized, actually that number is a little bit out of date. I think it's around $230, $240 million of capital mobilized by our projects to date. So as Elizabeth mentioned, the ecosystem that we're operating under for PACE is the New York City Accelerator. So PACE is one of the verticals. And NYCEC, as you know, in addition to kind of the financing work that we do, we're also a financial advisor to the City of New York, to the Mayor's office. And as part of that sort of scope of work, we are the administrator to the program, and our role is really to act as a regulator. We're going to confirm that all the projects meet the requirements imposed by the state and the city, and that includes the NYSERDA guidelines. They definitely run to us as part of the city program. We're going to ensure that the PACE charges are collected and remitted to the lenders by the city. So we're really the kind of the go-between or the intermediary between the city and lenders. Working alongside accelerator staff, we're going to conduct outreach and really deal with stakeholder inquiry. Anyone who has a question that's related to a PACE program can come to us, to the accelerator, to get those questions answered. That's part of our job. And then we're going to oversee measurement and verification and report on program impacts. We want to make sure that these projects actually achieve the level of savings and greenhouse gas reduction that are projected. So this slide speaks to the amount of investment that's going to be required to meet the demands of Local Law 97 by 2030. And this was done by Urban Green Council. They projected that $20 billion of investment will have to be made across the 2.5 billion square feet, or approximately 50,000 buildings that have to comply with Local Law 97. So that's a lot of investment, and that's why we think that PACE is going to be an important piece to the puzzle. People are going to need financing in a lot of cases to do the work that's required by Local Law 97, and we think that PACE is going to be a very attractive financing option for many borrowers. So just an overview of PACE financing. PACE is Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a public-private financing mechanism where third-party lenders will make loans to building owners to do cost-effective energy efficiency or renewable energy improvements. So the building owners will take those the proceeds from those loans, make the improvements, and then repay those loans through their property tax bill. So there'll be a line item on their bill alongside their property tax charges and assessments and water and sewer. So there'll be a separate fund there. Loan terms are up to 20 to 30 years typically, and interest rates are competitive as compared to sort of other financing options, outside of the mortgage financing realm. So some PACE financing basics. A PACE loan obligation stays with a building even after sale. So this is important because if you're a building owner and you want to do a project, but your horizon for ownership is relatively short, you still may be able to take on a project with PACE financing that makes sense for you. Garner the benefits from doing those improvements and then sell your building, and that obligation then sort of stays with the building and goes to the successor owner. So that's attractive from that perspective. PACE loans are non-accelerating. They don't require immediate repayment with default. So just like an unpaid property tax, there would be a lien connected to that unpaid PACE charge. And then that lien actually would have a senior security interest even over a mortgage lender's security interest. So for that reason, mortgage lender consent is required in our program. A little bit more on mortgage lender consent. Why would a mortgage lender ever consent to additional financing coming onto their property and with their security interest being trumped? Well, there are a bunch of considerations. Client relationship is important. If a lender has a building owner borrower that's a good client, they may want to continue that good relationship and allow for them to take on the financing. That really won't happen without sort of a project penciling, and the program and PACE is really designed so that the loans are generally cash flow positive, so that the energy savings that are achieved by the improvements will offset the debt service, the PACE debt service. So that increases the building's NOI, increases the value of the property. And added onto that, in New York, Local Law 97 fines will be avoided. So again, a benefit to the NOI and value of the building. So it does make a lot of sense from a lender's perspective. An impediment historically and today, I think continues to be institutional knowledge. A lot of these mortgage lenders don't know what PACE is, don't understand it. Even if a bank or within a larger bank understands what PACE is and consents to a particular project, that doesn't necessarily mean that the bank then sort of develops a view or a policy vis-a-vis PACE. So I think there is a barrier there that hopefully we can overcome or help to overcome as PACE comes online in New York City. I think there's going to be more demand and sort of more inquiry driven just by the demand that's created in New York City. And so we hope to play a part in educating the marketplace and getting lenders over that hump. This is a diagram just showing kind of the flow of funds in PACE financing. So I've talked through this, but sometimes it helps to visualize it. So number one, pre-qualified lenders will make a loan to a building owner borrower. That's number two. The building owner takes those proceeds, makes the investment in their building, makes the improvements. Once those projects are complete, they get a property tax bill with a PACE charge line item. So they make that payment on a semi-annual basis to the taxing authority, the Department of Finance in New York City. DOF collects those proceeds, segregates them, and then works with a paying agent through us in our program. That's going to be JP Morgan Chase, and they will pass those proceeds on to the lenders. Who benefits from a PACE financing? Certainly the multifamily housing sector, rental buildings, co-ops, affordable housing all can take advantage of PACE financing. It's really a lifeline for a building that can't refinance their mortgage if they're mid-cycle, and it's not cost effective to do a refinancing, but they have to do work immediately. It's a great option. In commercially tenanted buildings, PACE charge payments can be passed through to tenants in most commercial leases. Commercial building owners, I already made this point, but commercial building owners often hold properties, for less than 10 years or even, a very short period of time. But again, they only pay debt service on the savings they enjoy as a PACE obligation for the time that they own the building. Because once it's sold, again, that's inherited by the successor owner. And then for municipalities, PACE financing is it's great because it's an economic development engine. It's a job creation engine. PACE increases property values and cash flow, improves resident health and comfort, and contributes, most importantly, I think, in this context, to the environmental goals of the city. It's really the carrot to the stick of Local Law 97. And that's kind of the way it was positioned under the CMA. Property eligibility, the property must be commercial real estate located in the 5 boroughs, and that includes multifamily buildings of 3 units or greater. Nonprofit and religious facilities also qualify. All measures must be cost effective, energy efficiency measures, renewable energy systems, or related costs. So what that means is in New York City and in the state as well, there's a savings to investment ratio requirement where the savings will be equal to or greater than the investment, the cost of the financing. So that includes energy savings. In the context of New York City, that includes Local Law 97 fines avoided. And New York State also gives credit for carbon reduction. There's a coefficient for different energy types and they're reduced. And you can find those in the NYCgov guidelines. And like I said, we're subject to the guidelines as well. So that's the way we're going to be calculating or making that SIR calculation. In New York City or New York State, they call it the CBR, the cost benefit ratio, but I think in most other contexts, it's called the SIR. So New York State, I mentioned there's a program that's sort of separate from the New York City program. There's some similarities. We're both subject to the same, products of the same state law. The NYCgov guidelines apply across both programs, and these are open programs, both of us. Any pre-qualified lender can become a PACE lender in our program. There's no limitation on who can originate loans in New York City and in the state. Some key differences. We're the administrator for the city program. EIC, or the Energy Improvement Corporation, is the administrator for the statewide program. It's an open C-Place platform. So on behalf of all municipalities, I'm talking about EIC. So in order to make a PACE available in a jurisdiction outside of the city, that municipality has to adopt a local law and then sign an agreement with EIC. And thereafter, in terms of municipal involvement, it's fairly limited. For us, the city is directly involved in the financing. They're doing the collections, the Department of Finance. In the EIC or state context, PACE borrowers will be making their payments to lenders directly and not through the municipality. And the same goes for enforcement. Under most circumstances in New York City, we expect that lenders will be availing themselves of the city enforcement options to pursue repayment for delinquent payments. In the state or EIC program, lenders will be enforcing repayment directly, and cities really had taken a hands-on approach. So where does the program stand today? So enabling legislation was passed in April of 2019, so we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary. Final rule is anticipated to be published next week. We've heard on Monday. So that there's an aging process of 30 days, and then it's considered effective. Legal documentation is being finalized as we speak. Spent a lot of time working with city lawyers to come up with some documents, and now we're in the process of getting some feedback from the marketplace. but hope to have those complete soon. And we're launching an online platform, a Salesforce platform to approve PACE projects. So that'll be really an interface that's accessed by lenders who are bringing projects to be vetted by us in the city. And then that's, we expect again that to be done by our estimated program launch date, which today stands at April 22nd, Earth Day. That's our sort of, based on best information that I have, the expected launch date. Of course, things can always change with the city, but we do think that the launch date is very, very close. So we're excited about that. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions. And you have my contact information. Please feel free to reach out.
That's great. Thank you very much. So there is a whole host of questions, and I'm going to start by trying to group them into common categories. There are a lot of questions revolve around eligible property types. For example, are all multifamily property types eligible? Are condos eligible? And are there any special considerations for historic buildings?
Sure, I'll take a stab. Yeah, I mentioned kind of what the parameters are around property types. You mentioned condos. That's a tricky one. The issue with condos is you don't really have kind of, real estate that you can pledge, in the instance if there's a non-payment or, what becomes lienable. I think there probably are ways to manage that, but really it's kind of lender dependent and building dependent. There may be some real estate like a supers unit in a condo building that can be sort of foreclosed upon if it comes to that. But that's really the issue. What's the security interest? There may be some ability to aggregate, ownership so that you can take on a financing kind of as a group. But it's not going to be a simple process. I think we could probably accommodate something along those lines, but it really becomes incumbent on the lender to make sure that happens. And they're the ones that are ultimately at risk in terms of non-payment. And then there's complication around structuring. So something that we expect won't happen a lot just because of the difficulties I've described. But something that maybe on a case-by-case basis we would look at and consider.
Right, and then one of the attendees asked about landmark buildings, if there's any special restrictions for applying for PACE, are they considered like a commercial building? And if they receive funding from other city programs, can that be used in conjunction with funding?
You broke up a little bit there, but I think I got the question. I actually don't have a lot of familiarity with kind of how landmarks works. I assume that, actually I don't want to speak to it because I don't know what the restrictions are. So I'm going to punt on that one. I'm happy to look into it and follow up if someone wants to follow up with me separately. Sorry, you broke up on the second half of that question. So if you could just repeat.
I think there are some questions about if you receive funds from other sources, can you still use PACE financing, and how are those funds working in conjunction with the PACE?
I mean, there are no per se restrictions on other funding sources. If you, and I'm not sure what the person is specifically thinking of. There may be some restrictions associated with that funding. Where but PACE, like in a mortgage context and other contexts, you might, we need to get maybe consent, but there's no sort of per se restriction, I think, on other sources of funding.
So if a project's $5 million and you receive $1 million from NYCerta or from the city towards that project, could you finance the full $5 million, or just $4 million would be eligible for PACE?
That's a good question. Haven't really thought about that. I guess, yeah. I mean, if you establish that as, I don't want to necessarily say anything that's considered definitive because I haven't really been able to think about it. But so it's like a double dipping, I guess, question.
Launching a new program is a heroic effort, and every day there will be questions.
Yeah, novel
like
questions.
this.
I know. Yeah, we get them all the time. Yeah, that's a I guess an interesting scenario. You establish an expense, a cost, and you may have other sources of funding coming in. Yeah, I guess I'm sorry. I have to again punt on that and maybe consult with some of my my colleagues. I'm not 100% sure what we would do in that situation.
There's a question here about job creation and the economic benefit for New York from PACE. So, I mean, it's no secret that the city has emptied. A lot of renters have left. There's been a huge economic effect with COVID. Can PACE contribute to any rebound? Will there be any job creation? How do you envision PACE contributing to the economic I don't know, Elizabeth, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think all of the back end analysis and the research that we've done, both from like creating the Climate Mobilization Act, the Urban Green Council analysis that Fred shared, around the kind of emergence of the retrofit market, and then specifically tied to PACE, all of this is construction jobs and the kind of, we'll have, there's an opportunity to just to really transform, and we've heard that from the federal level, and definitely here in New York City, and the new mayoral race and the candidates there, and what they're talking about is like, we need capital and we need resources to come to New York. There's going to be stimulus, but that has to be paired with the private investment. But all of that working together is the opportunity to get people back in jobs, to renovate the buildings that we have, to convert spaces that were used as something else that we don't need. We realize we don't need as much of anymore into something that we really do need, and affordable housing remains a critical item and something that this program and our office and the Accelerator Program are very committed to helping. So long answer short is like, yes, this will create jobs, and this is the kind of economic stimulus and construction related work that people are always pointing to as really is a good quality long-term jobs and employment options for people that are living in the region.
I will say there are many studies that point to energy efficiency projects have looked at it from a research perspective and have shown that there's a certain number of job creations. It's generally described as 17 jobs for every $1 million of investment. Anecdotally, as a capital provider, I can say that a large percentage of the calls we get looking for PACE financing is a stalled project that the contractor will be losing, the sub will be losing the job because the owner doesn't have equity or doesn't want to put the equity into the building, or a new construction project that has a gap that these projects just can't get off the ground. So I think that supporting the construction industry is certainly pretty well established at this point with PACE financing. There's some questions about eligibility of specific projects. There's one person that's asking about an 8760 energy model, eQuest or similar will be required as part of the energy study. I think the required energy study for PACE financing, can any of the current required benchmarking be used as part of it, or is there additional studies? What studies would be needed? If you could address that.
You cut out, at least for me, a little bit there, but I think the question relates to the energy audit requirement.
Yeah, the energy audit requirement. There's a question if you need to use the 8760 energy model, eQuest or similar. But I think that ties into, can you use any of the existing energy studies that the city currently requires, and how can they be used?
Yeah, I mean, the local law 87 audit can be used. I'm not familiar with that specific audit type, but again, we're subject to the NYCerta guidelines. I think that may address, may or may not, but that's sort of where our touchstone in terms of what's eligible. But yeah, the short answer is you can use your local law 87 audit. We do want to make sure though that the audit ties directly to the actual scope of work that's implemented. So there is going to be a requirement that there is a bring down of that audit to square with the scope of work, and that's certified by the original auditor or by another qualified third party, just to make sure that each of the measures that actually go into the project are covered by the audit.
Great. So affordable housing will be eligible for PACE. Can you discuss getting consent from a lender, especially if they have a HUD loan, or what other kind, let you discuss affordable housing and how PACE can be used for everyone in New York?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a challenging sector. My understanding, and I don't know, maybe you can speak to this as a capital provider, is that because of the difficulty in getting consents, typically from more than one other lender or capital provider to that building, that a lot of PACE originators can shy away from those projects just because of the difficulty in getting kind of the different layers of consent from more than one, just the mortgage lender. So that's been a challenge and something that we want to try to help figure out. In New York City, at least, we have had conversations with HDC, the Housing Development Corporation, and sort of discussing how to maybe provide PACE financing to some of their borrowers in their portfolio, and they would be directly lending kind of as the PACE lender, and there you don't obviously have to deal with a mortgage lender consent. But yeah, it's a tough area because I think I don't want to speak for you, but I know that for a lot of capital providers, a lot of the work comes in getting these consents. It's an expensive process, and to the extent you can't avoid it, you do, and then you want to go for like the bigger projects, the low-hanging fruit ultimately, and that's certainly not the case for affordable housing. It's oftentimes pretty difficult to reach it.
Yeah, yesterday actually we closed an assessment that was associated with new market tax credits, of which we needed to obtain consent from 5 separate lenders and a consortium. I think the burden is education and explaining PACE, that even though it's the senior position, it's non-accelerating, and just explaining the tax foreclosure mechanism for that particular area, and how working with the lender to get them comfortable in their underwriting, that they still have the coverage and the collateral and the coverage that they need to meet their writing standards. Is there a way for an engineering firm or real estate firm can partner with the New York City PACE program to offer PACE financing during building retrofit?
Is there to partner with? Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is there a way an engineering firm or a real estate firm can partner with the New York City PACE program to offer PACE financing?
Yeah, I mean, lenders can certainly, they can certainly work with lenders. There's no real partnering with us as the administrator, and I don't want to speak for the city or with the city, but they'll certainly have a role to play and can work with lenders who are originating, pre-qualified lenders, to help with the financing and PACE financing. So there certainly will be a role for both.
Yeah, I can add on to that. I think it's definitely sounds like a great opportunity, and not something that, we're not in a position to have, a partnership like lender and engineer partnership connected to the PACE program, but independently pre-qualified lenders can partner with an engineer of their choosing, and establishing that relationship, and will really help to like streamline the process. And I think that's best practice for a lot of different providers across the country. And also additionally, as part of the NYC Accelerator, we'll be launching pre-qualified lists for service providers that will help engineers and consultants and other service providers that can support compliance with Local Law 97. And there's a really good harmony there between the technicians that can provide the review and the work to do the retrofits needed for 97, and then of course the pre-qualified lenders who can provide the capital through PACE to do that work. And we try to set up these pieces and bring people together, but making those types of partnerships is kind of where the market has to step in and take that on themselves.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one thing, and I mentioned this earlier. There is a role for either the sort of the original audit provider, because we want to make sure that the audit, if it's an older audit, particularly, matches up with the scope of work, and so we do want sort of that auditor sign off or certification. And then maybe some additional work that needs to be done if the scope of work is outside of what the original audit envisioned. So certainly there is a role to play for that service provider, or another third party who can verify that the work being done is consistent with what's in the audit.
Fred, I know the guidelines have not been published or finalized. Do you have any indication on the look back, or how long can a project be completed? PACE is going to be obviously earmarked towards the Local Law 97 and HVAC improvements, but anyhow, do you have any indication of what might be considered for the look back period?
Yeah, so with the caveat that the guidelines are not yet final, we are going to allow for a look back period. We're talking a little bit, this is a little bit in consultation with Elizabeth's office and figuring out exactly how far back we'll go. I think right now, I don't know if Elizabeth, I can speak to kind of what we have envisioned, and you can respond to me and tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, but we're envisioning a 3-year look back, but with a cutoff at the passage date of the CMA of Local Law 96, so April of 2019.
So currently 2 years and possibly 3
Going
years
out,
longer.
yep.
Right,
Exactly.
right. So if someone wants to upgrade building energy efficiency that is less than 25 square feet, can they still apply for PACE financing?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think, yeah, in many cities when they're mandating updates, the financing is offered as a way to help owners meet the city policy and planning guides, but it can certainly be taken advantage of by many commercial owners.
Yeah, and I'd love to just kind of reiterate that and kind of put these pieces together. While Local Law 97 requires buildings over 25,000 square feet to complete retrofit work and meet a carbon budget, all commercial buildings, including multifamily buildings over 3 units and nonprofits, and there's a couple other ands, are eligible for PACE financing, regardless of, it's not a square footage based program. It's really it's towards the commercial real estate sector, but includes multifamily buildings with 3+ units, because in order for us to meet our goals and to see this transformation happen, we really do need action from all sectors of the market, including small commercial buildings.
Great. So there's a lot of interest in PACE, and there's a lot of questions that have evolved towards what's the interest rate? What are the financing terms? Will they be higher than traditional rates? And if they are higher, what are the benefits over traditional? Why should I choose PACE? Fred, Elizabeth, I'm not sure who wants to address.
I mean, that I can start, but that feels to me like a question that you're probably best positioned to answer. The rates really are dependent on who the capital provider or the originator is, and you know, their cost of capital. So I would say, just generally speaking, it is you know, sort of considering other options outside of the sort of mortgage financing concept, mortgage financing world. A cost-effective and relatively cheap financing option, and maybe the most attractive in a lot of cases. You have the ability to go out long-term, and again, your alternatives are, I think, relatively expensive for what you're getting. And so, I don't know, Michelle, if you have anything you want to add to that, that would be my sort of high-level take.
Yeah, I think it's market dependent on the capital provider. But it with the caveat that this is not a loan in traditional financing. There are a lot of other steps to this that need. I think what is not quite understood are the technical requirements, getting the project that and going through all of the project and making sure that you have eligible improvements. What is eligible or not, which is definitely different than traditional financing. And I think we're probably not going to have the time to go over all the benefits of PACE over traditional financing. But it's a cost benefit to compare with traditional financing. For you know, some financing like mezzanine for new construction is not currently allowed in New York City, but in a lot of PACE jurisdictions, PACE is replacing mezzanine because the rates are lower than that. There's all types of financing tools, and the owner just needs to choose what works best for their particular situation.
Yeah, at least with new construction, you know, like I think I mentioned, it is coming online. We expect very, very soon. So hopefully that happens. And I know there's a lot of interest in new construction, at least from the sort of the lender perspective.
Great.
So,
I just want to pause here for a second because I know we only have about 5-6 minutes left. So Michelle, if you want to do one or two, final questions to kind of wrap up. And thank you to everybody who submitted so many questions today. I'm sorry we couldn't get through them all, but I'll share them with the panelists after the discussion as well.
That's great. So I think I'd like to leave it with, how can this accelerator program help a property owner and guide them through this, Elizabeth?
Great, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so I think we all recognize there's a lot of steps between like conception of like this project's a good idea to like closing on financing and then building it and occupying the building. And so I think the program NYC Accelerator that the city set up is really to kind of help first on that awareness, like what are your options? What's the pathway? What are you up against and what are your opportunities? And mapping out what are some of those best resources for you. And is it conventional financing? Is it PACE? Is it a program from a utility company or an NYCerta? There's just so many options out there. And if you aren't in a position where you have a director of sustainability or your facilities manager is also a sustainability or energy efficiency guru, it's a daunting of a place to be in right now. But so we want to make sure this, like the city is here to provide this service to make sure people know what these options are, have a pathway, and start moving, because 97 compliance dates for many buildings are starting in 2024, which is very soon, and others 2030. But these are not projects that you can just check off and do in the cooling season. These are multi-year projects that take a lot of thought and consideration and balancing of interests and tenant considerations and move in, move out, and end of useful life and capital planning. And so the program that we're offering is really to help bring all those things together and then put put practitioners and projects on the right path and connect them to the right providers, whether that's a PACE qualified or the right energy consultant, or or working with one of our agency partners like the Department of Housing Preservation and Development to make sure that they're getting the assistance that they need.
Thank you. So I want to thank Urban Green for helping to spread the gospel of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions and this presenting PACE as a way of possibly helping owners. I believe that Urban Green's John Van Dyke would like to speak at this point. And thank you once again. We really appreciate the chance to address these very important issues.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Hello, everybody. I'm John Van Dyke, the CEO of Urban Green. I want to thank Elizabeth and Fred and Michelle for a fantastic discussion about a really, really important tool for Local Law 97 and how we're going to tackle carbon reduction in New York. So thank you. I want to thank everybody for your engagement. I was watching the questions. It was remarkable. So we appreciate that. I also want to call your attention to an upcoming program we have coming up next week on March 23rd. This is our Urban Green Live series. This is our live video podcast where we bring national and local experts, even global experts to you, where we engage in a dialogue and offer them for you to ask important questions. And we're excited that our next guest is going to be Steve Nadell. He's the executive director of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy in Washington, D.C., and one of the nation's leading experts on energy efficiency. This whole program is meant to answer your questions on where is the federal government going with energy policy, with energy efficiency policy, and how is it going to impact buildings? Because, you know, we're going to see a lot of changes coming down the road. We're going to unpack all that with Steve next week on Urban Green Live. So I encourage all of you to attend. I think it's going to be a great discussion. This is your chance to get your questions answered too. So thank you again for joining us for this great program today. We hope to see you next week at Urban Green Live and another Urban Green program. Everybody stay safe and be well until then. Thank you.